It's crazy when you think about it, how Bitcoin, this super cutting-edge thing, actually has these roots going way back.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking like clandestine government stuff, Cold War anxieties, the whole fight for digital privacy.
Yeah, it really is kind of wild how all these threads come together, right? I wouldn't think they'd be connected, but they all lead to Bitcoin.
Totally, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today
Yeah.
on the deep dive.
Sounds good.
We're going deep on the evolution of Bitcoin. And to help us do that, we're tapping into a really interesting discussion with Nik Bhatia, the author of Bitcoin Age.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
You know, you mentioned before that you're all about getting a solid grasp on these things without drowning in technical mumbo-jumbo.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're aiming for here. We've boiled down our chat with Nik to give you the essential aha moments, no jargon overload, just those key connections that explain how Bitcoin came to be.
Like a clear roadmap of how we got here.
Exactly. So our main source material for this deep dive is the transcript of that YouTube discussion with Nik Bhatia.
Lots to unpack there.
It covers a ton of ground. Bitcoin's current market position, the influence of historical communication technologies, even the crazy crypto wars, and the U.S. government's ever-changing stance on Bitcoin.
All over the place.
But our mission with this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We want to explain in plain English the major factors that led to Bitcoin's emergence and its ongoing journey into the mainstream.
Makes sense.
We'll point out some surprising links along the way, stuff you wouldn't expect.
I love that kind of stuff.
Me too. So to kick things off, let's look at where Bitcoin stands right now. Nik seems to think we're in a pretty important phase.
He does. Bhatia says we're currently in what he calls the mainstreaming phase of Bitcoin, and he puts this around 2024 to 2025.
Interesting.
He points to some big milestones to back that up.
Okay, like what?
Well, for starters, Bitcoin broke through that $100,000 price point for the first time, and then it hit a $2 trillion market cap.
Those are some serious achievements.
Definitely landmark moments. And don't forget, he also mentioned that seven-fold increase from its 2022 low, which is pretty remarkable considering how high the Fed's interest rates have been.
Right, even with those traditional financial headwinds, Bitcoin's been holding strong.
It really has. Bhatia actually uses a great analogy here to illustrate this. He compares Bitcoin's price surges to the stages of a rocket launch.
I like that.
We've had those powerful initial bursts of acceleration, and now we're entering a phase of more sustained altitude gain.
Okay, so less about those explosive takeoffs and more about establishing a higher, more stable orbit, even if there might be a few bumps along the way.
Exactly. Now, of course, there's always that debate about whether Bitcoin can keep delivering those huge percentage gains year after year as its overall market size grows.
Right, with a bigger market comes more weight to move.
It's the concept of diminishing returns. So what did Nik have to say about that?
Well, Bhatia offers what he calls a hedged answer on that one, which I think is pretty smart.
Okay, how so?
He emphasizes that the price of Bitcoin at any given time really boils down to the balance between supply and demand.
Classic economics.
Right. Well, those massive annual percentage gains we saw in the early days might become less frequent simply because the market's so much bigger now.
Makes sense.
He doesn't rule out the possibility of big blowout years happening down the line.
So those crazy jumps aren't completely off the table?
Not necessarily. He also talked about how the increasing maturity of the Bitcoin market itself could play a role in smoothing out those wild price swings.
How so?
Well, he points to the growing availability of ways to bet against Bitcoin's price, what they call shorting.
Okay.
And then you've got long-term holders who are less likely to sell, and the influence of option sellers. All these things together can actually act as a brake on extreme volatility and rapid price spikes.
Got it. So like a balancing act.
Right. He used a really good analogy to explain this. Imagine the Bitcoin market as this tug of war between those who believe the price will go up, the buyers, and those who think it'll go down, the sellers. As the sellers get more sophisticated, like those option sellers who are basically offering insurance against huge price increases.
I see.
They essentially add more resistance to those big upward pulls on the price.
Okay, so more anchors on one side of that tug-of-war rope.
Exactly. It's a great way to picture it. So it seems like Bitcoin's march into the mainstream is gaining momentum.
It definitely looks that way.
But Nik also brought up this really interesting idea he calls the mind trick of credit.
Yeah, what's the gist of that?
Well, it ties into this clever Star Wars reference he makes right at the start of his book.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Qui-Gon Jinn tries to use Republic credits on Tatooine and gets this dismissive response about how they're worthless there.
Right, because they don't operate on credit there.
Exactly, and Bhatia uses this to illustrate the point that Modern money, what he often calls credit, like the US dollar or the euro, is essentially a step removed from tangible wealth.
Okay, a representation of value.
Right. Historically, these currencies were often linked to gold or other precious metals.
So they had something backing them up.
But now it's more about trust and belief in the system.
Which is where the mind trick comes in.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Bhatia argues that just holding onto credit, meaning letting your fiat currency sit in a savings account without investing it, particularly in things that might gain value over time, like stocks, real estate, or even Bitcoin, can actually hurt your wealth in the long run because inflation is constantly eating away at the purchasing power of your money.
So it's not like someone's deliberately trying to trick you.
Right. It's more like a built-in consequence of how the current financial system works.
It subtly encourages you to put your money to work instead of just hoarding it in its basic form, which will gradually lose its value over time.
That's like a slow leak in your financial boat.
I like that analogy.
So now let's shift gears a bit and look at the infrastructure that made a digital currency like Bitcoin even possible in the first place.
That's good.
Bhatia dives into the history of communication networks, going all the way back to Morse code and the telegraph.
Why so far back?
Well, he presents these early forms of electronic communication as the essential precursors, the very first drafts of the digital networks we rely on today.
Makes sense.
They were the initial breakthroughs in transmitting information across distances using electronic signals. But his real focus is on the ARPANET, the granddaddy of the internet.
The one that started it all.
What's really interesting is why the ARPANET was created. It was funded by the U.S. Department of Defense during the Cold War.
Oh, wow. So it had military origins.
Totally. Its main purpose wasn't social media or streaming videos. It was about building a decentralized and resilient communication network for the military, one that could survive a major attack without completely falling apart.
Strategic necessity.
Exactly. And at the heart of that resilience were these foundational protocols, TCP/IP.
Right. I've heard of those, but could you break them down a bit?
Sure. Think of TCP/IP as the basic rulebook for how data travels across the internet.
Okay.
TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol, and it's in charge of breaking down big chunks of data like a large email or a web page into smaller, manageable packets.
Sort of like disassembling a Lego castle into individual bricks.
Exactly. And then IP, or Internet Protocol, acts like the postal service of the internet. It gives each of those data packets a destination address, making sure they get routed to the right computer, just like an envelope.
So those packets can travel different paths across the network and get reassembled at the other end.
Yeah, it's like sending pieces of a puzzle that might take different routes, but they come together to form the complete picture when they arrive.
I like that.
And this is crucial for Bitcoin because it relies entirely on the internet and these TCP/IP protocols to transmit information about transactions between all the computers on its network.
Each with its own unique IP address.
Right. Bhatia highlights the concept of distributed networking, which was really pushed by a guy named Paul Barron.
Interesting.
The idea was to get rid of any single point of failure in the network. So if one part went down, communication could still flow through other pathways.
Like having multiple backup routes in a city?
It's exactly all about redundancy and preventing any single point of control. What's funny is that AT&T, the big telecom company back then, actually resisted this whole idea of packet switching.
Why would they do that?
Well, they had a near monopoly on long-distance communication, so they didn't really have any incentive to change things up.
They were comfortable with the status quo.
Right. They basically dismissed Barron's ideas and stuck with their old circuit-switched infrastructure.
But that resistance actually ended up helping pave the way for the decentralized nature of the internet.
It's true, because it forced the people creating ARPANET to find alternative, more distributed solutions.
So their lack of vision inadvertently created the open and distributed network that Bitcoin uses today.
It's pretty ironic when you think about it. So we've got the network foundation in place. Now let's talk about the crypto wars and the fight for digital privacy.
A crucial chapter in the story.
For sure. This was a period when the U.S. government, specifically the National Security Agency, or NSA, had a tight grip on cryptography.
They controlled the codes.
Pretty much. Yeah. For decades, most of the experts in code making and code breaking worked for the NSA.
A very secretive world.
But then a book came out that changed everything. David Kahn's The Code Breakers.
What was so groundbreaking about it?
Well, it exposed a lot of the NSA's closely guarded secrets, and suddenly people were fascinated by cryptography.
They were let in on the secret.
Right, and this new public awareness and knowledge inspired people like Whitfield Diffie, Marty Hellman, and Ralph Merkle to build upon those revealed concepts.
What did they come up with?
They developed modern encryption techniques and, most importantly, public key cryptography, which is absolutely essential to how Bitcoin works.
So they took that knowledge out of the hands of the government and brought it to the public.
Exactly, and that led to what became known as the crypto war,
Right.
which was essentially the U.S. government trying to classify encryption software as a weapon.
Wow, as if it were a missile or something.
Right, their goal was to restrict its publication use and export. They saw it as a national security threat if it fell into the wrong hands.
That's a pretty extreme stance.
It was Nik highlights this pivotal case of Daniel Bernstein, who fought for his right to publish his cryptographic work under the First Amendment.
Freedom of speech.
Exactly. He drew a comparison to economists publishing their mathematical models.
So code as a form of expression.
Right, and the courts sided with Bernstein, establishing that computer code, especially in cryptography, is protected by the First Amendment.
A big win for digital freedom.
It was a major setback for the government's attempts to control encryption. And it was in this climate of government resistance and the desire for digital empowerment that the cypherpunk movement emerged.
Those were the guys who really pushed for privacy and freedom in the digital world, right?
They were responding to this perceived government overreach and actively worked to develop and spread strong encryption technologies to the public.
So they put the power in the hands of the people.
And while our source doesn't go into the technical nitty-gritty, it's important to understand that proof of work, the mechanism that secures Bitcoin's decentralized network and validates transactions, was a key innovation that helped bring the cypherpunk's vision to life.
How so?
It provided a way to establish trust and prevent double spending without needing a central authority.
So the fight for strong encryption wasn't just some abstract debate. It laid the groundwork for Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Now, fast forward to today, and the U.S. government's stance on Bitcoin seems to have shifted quite a bit from that early skepticism.
Yeah, it's come a long way.
Bhatia points out the contrast between that initial suspicion and what he calls full-fledged adoption today.
What's he basing that on?
Well, there have been some recent developments, like news of a major government adding Bitcoin to its reserves.
That's a pretty big deal.
It is. But he also makes a distinction. He argues that the growing financialization of Bitcoin, things like Bitcoin ETFs and institutional investors pouring money in, was already happening, regardless of government approval.
So the big players were moving in even without an official green light.
Exactly. But Nik does acknowledge that government acceptance, when it happens, has a big impact on broader adoption.
Because people see it as a stamp of approval.
He uses this analogy of leaders and followers. The early Bitcoin adopters were the pioneers, the leaders, driven by their belief in the technology.
They were the ones who saw the potential early on.
Right, and government acceptance acts as a signal to a much wider audience of followers who look to authorities for reassurance.
So it makes them more comfortable jumping in.
Exactly. Bhatia believes this broader acceptance could significantly expand the Bitcoin network, potentially from its current estimated 500 million users to billions worldwide.
Wow, that's a huge potential increase.
It is. So it's not that Bitcoin needed the government to be legitimate, but that acceptance just broadens its appeal and makes it seem more legitimate to a larger chunk of the global population.
It removes a barrier for a lot of people.
Right, so those who are already convinced of Bitcoin's value didn't need that official stamp of approval. But for mass adoption to happen, that government acceptance is key.
Makes sense.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. What's the big takeaway from this deep dive into Bitcoin's origins and evolution?
Well, I think the story of Bitcoin is this really fascinating mix of groundbreaking technology, political battles for digital freedom, and the ever-changing nature of money itself.
It's a wild ride.
It is. From the Cold War origins of the internet to the crypto wars fought for privacy, the things that made Bitcoin possible were put in place by a series of events that seem totally unrelated on the surface.
It's amazing how it all connects.
Definitely. So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Now that a major government has embraced Bitcoin, what new challenges and opportunities might come up for its decentralized nature and its global adoption?
That's a great question.
Will this lead to a new era of financial sovereignty for people around the world, or could it create new forms of centralized control that we haven't even thought of yet?
It's something to keep in mind as we move forward.
Absolutely.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Don't forget to hit that follow button. Give us a like and share this with anyone you think might find it interesting.
Spread the word.
You can also stay up to date with what Bitcoin taught me on Twitter, X Nostrobluski Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
We're everywhere.
We try to be.
So people can find us wherever they hang out.
Exactly. That's the goal.
Awesome. Well, this was fun.
Always is. Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.